I'm Jessica, 29 years old, and I never thought I'd hear those words from my own parents. You have 48 hours to get your stuff out. Your sister owns that house now. 3 years of putting my life on hold to care for my family, and this was my reward. The betrayal cut deep, especially knowing Madison had been plotting behind my back the entire time. What they didn't realize was that house wasn't just theirs to give away. Before I continue with my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when family does you wrong. Growing up, I always thought our family was close. Not perfect, but close. I'm the oldest of two daughters, always the responsible one. Madison is 4 years younger, now 25, and has always been the baby of the family. Our dynamic was pretty typical. I looked out for her, she looked up to me, at least that's what I thought. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, raised us in a beautiful colonial-style home in a quiet suburb of Boston. Dad built his accounting firm from the ground up, and Mom worked as a part-time art teacher until Madison was born, then became a full-time mom. We were comfortable, not wealthy, but never wanted for anything important. After college, I moved to Chicago and started building my career in marketing. I was doing well, had just received my first promotion at a digital advertising agency, was dating someone I really liked, and had a great group of friends. Life was going according to plan. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. Mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. The prognosis was good, but the treatment would be rough. Dad called me, sounding more vulnerable than I'd ever heard him. "Jessica, we need you," he said. "Your mother needs you." Without hesitation, I packed up my life. I took a leave of absence from my job, which eventually turned into a resignation when I realized how long Mom's recovery would take. I broke up with my boyfriend, who wasn't interested in a long-distance relationship. I said goodbye to my friends and my independence, moving back into my childhood bedroom at 26. The first year was focused entirely on Mom's health. I drove her to chemotherapy appointments, held her hand through the worst of it, researched alternative therapies to help with the side effects, and tried to keep the household running. Dad was busy with his business, which needed even more attention now with the medical bills piling up. Madison was in her final year of college and came home occasionally, but was too busy with finals or preparing for graduation to help much. After Mom went into remission, I stayed. Partly because she still needed support, partly because I'd already dismantled my Chicago life, and partly because of a conversation I had with my parents over dinner one night. "We're so grateful for everything you've done, Jessica," Dad said, reaching for my hand across the table. "We couldn't have gotten through this without you." Mom nodded, her hair just starting to grow back. "This house has always been meant for you girls anyway. Your father and I have talked about it, and since you're here helping us, maybe this is how it's supposed to be. You could take over the master bedroom after we're gone, make the house your own. We're not planning on going anywhere soon," Dad added quickly. "But knowing you'll be here, taking care of the place we built our lives in, it gives us peace of mind." It wasn't a formal agreement, nothing in writing, but it was understood. I had put my life on hold for my family, and the house would eventually be my inheritance. So I settled in. I found a decent marketing job locally, though it was a step down from my Chicago position. I started dating again, but casually. My life became centered around that house and my family. I poured myself into making improvements to the home. I repainted every room, updated the kitchen with my own savings, planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, and converted the basement into a cozy entertainment space. I paid for most of these improvements myself, seeing them as investments in my future home. Meanwhile, Madison graduated and moved to New York to work in fashion. She visited on holidays, accepted the gifts and care packages I sent, and called Mom weekly. She was living the independent life I had given up, which I didn't resent until I realized she never once acknowledged my sacrifice. Then, about 6 months ago, Madison called home crying. Her relationship had ended badly, her roommate situation had become toxic, and her job was overwhelming her. Without consulting me, my parents immediately invited her to move back home until she got back on her feet. From the moment Madison returned, something felt different. She took over the second largest bedroom, which I had been using as a home office. She rearranged the living room furniture without asking. She used my special kitchen gadgets and left them unwashed. Small things, but they felt like territorial markers. "It's just temporary," Mom assured me when I expressed concern. "She's going through a hard time." But I noticed the way Madison looked at me across the dinner table, like I was an intruder in her childhood home. I caught the private conversations between her and my parents that would abruptly stop when I entered the room. I felt the subtle shift in the family dynamic, as if I were being edged out of the inner circle. I tried to ignore these feelings, telling myself I was being paranoid. Madison was family, after all. We were sisters. We had shared this home, these parents, this life. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The stage was being set for a confrontation none of us were prepared for. The first clear sign that something was seriously wrong came about 3 months after Madison moved back home. I came downstairs one morning to find her measuring the walls in the living room. "What are you doing?" I asked, clutching my coffee mug. "Just thinking about some new curtains," she replied casually. "These ones are so outdated." "I picked those curtains last year," I said, feeling oddly defensive. "They match the new couch I bought." Madison shrugged. "They're not really my style." I was thinking something more modern. "Well, maybe we should discuss changes with Mom and Dad first," I suggested, trying to keep my tone light. Madison gave me a strange look. "Why?" "It's just curtains, Jess. Don't be so controlling." That exchange set the tone for the weeks that followed. Madison began making small changes around the house, rearranging bookshelves, swapping out throw pillows, replacing the shower curtain in our shared bathroom. Each change was minor enough that objecting would make me seem petty, but collectively they represented a systematic erasure of my presence in the home. One evening, I overheard Madison talking to Mom in the kitchen. "I was thinking we could convert the basement back to a storage space," she was saying. "I need somewhere to keep my design samples and portfolio materials." "But Jessica just renovated that space," Mom replied hesitantly. "It's not really functional though, is it? And she's hardly ever down there anymore." I had spent thousands of dollars and countless weekends transforming that basement from a damp storage area to a comfortable entertainment room. The thought of it being dismantled for Madison's fashion samples made my stomach churn. The next day, I tried to talk to Dad about it. "Dad, I'm feeling a bit displaced since Madison moved back," I admitted. "It seems like she's trying to take over the house." Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "She's just nesting, Jessica. It's natural after what she's been through. You should be more understanding." "I am understanding, but this is my home too. I've put a lot into it." "It's all of our home," Dad corrected, finally meeting my gaze. "And Madison needs stability right now. You're the strong one, you always have been." That became the refrain. Madison needed support. I was the strong one. I should be more understanding. No one seemed to remember that I had needs too, that I had given up my life to be there. The situation escalated when I came home from work one day to find my belongings moved from the master bedroom, which I had gradually taken over as Mom and Dad downsized to the guest suite for easier mobility during Mom's recovery, into my old childhood bedroom. "What is going on?" I demanded, finding Madison arranging her clothes in what had been my closet. "Mom and Dad thought it made more sense for me to take this room," Madison explained without a hint of apology. "Since I have more clothes and need the bigger closet for my work." "And no one thought to discuss this with me first?" "They said they mentioned it to you," Madison replied, though her eyes slid away from mine, confirming the lie. I confronted my parents that evening. Mom looked uncomfortable but deferred to Dad, who seemed unusually firm. "Madison needs the space for her design work," he said. "Your old room is perfectly fine for one person." "I've been in that master bedroom for over a year," I argued. "I repainted it, bought new curtains, replaced the carpet with my own money. And we appreciate those improvements," Dad said. "But the house is still ours, Jessica. We get to decide who sleeps where." The phrase, "the house is still ours," struck me as odd. Had I ever suggested otherwise? But I backed down, not wanting to create more tension. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, feeling like I'd somehow been demoted. The following weekend, the family gathered for dinner. Madison had prepared the meal, something she'd never done before. As we ate, she began talking about her future plans for the house. "I'm thinking of turning the back bedroom into a design studio," she announced. "The light is perfect in there." "The back bedroom is my home office," I interjected. "Well, you can work anywhere, can't you?" Madison replied. "Your job is just on the computer. My work requires space." I looked to my parents for support, but they were nodding along with Madison's plans. It was as if they'd already discussed and approved everything without me. "And once I get established, I was thinking we could redo the kitchen," Madison continued. "Something more contemporary." "I just updated the kitchen last year," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I paid for those renovations myself." "And they're lovely," Mom said quickly. "But tastes change, and Madison has such a good eye for design." The conversation continued in this vein, with Madison outlining her vision for our family home as if she were the sole heir to the property. My parents encouraged her, offering suggestions, completely oblivious to my growing distress. Later that night, I found Dad in his study, working on some papers. "Dad, can we talk about what happened at dinner?" I asked. He looked up, seeming distracted. "What about it?" "It felt like you were all planning the future of this house without me. After everything we discussed about me taking over eventually." Dad's expression changed, becoming guarded. "Jessica, those were just conversations. Nothing was ever set in stone." "But I've been making investments in this house based on those conversations," I insisted. "I've put thousands of dollars into improvements. And we appreciate that," Dad said, his tone becoming businesslike. "But circumstances change. Madison needs a fresh start, and she has a vision for the place." "And what about my vision? What about what I need?" "You're established, Jessica. You have a job, savings. Madison is still finding her way." I left his study feeling like the ground beneath my feet had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in our family dynamic, and I was the only one who hadn't been informed. The next morning, I found several of my potted plants from the porch arranged by the garbage bins. When I rescued them and brought them back, Madison informed me that she was redoing the porch decor and my plants didn't match the aesthetic. It was becoming clear that I was being systematically removed from the home I had helped maintain for years. What I couldn't understand was why my parents were not just allowing it, but actively facilitating it. The betrayal cut deep, but I had no idea how much deeper it would go. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I went to work, dealt with a minor crisis with a client's social media campaign, and stopped at the grocery store on the way home to pick up ingredients for dinner. It was my turn to cook, and I was planning to make Mom's favorite pasta dish. When I arrived home, I found my parents and Madison sitting in the living room, an unusual sight for a Tuesday evening. They looked up as I entered, and I immediately sensed something was wrong. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, Dad's expression was stern, and Madison had a strange, almost triumphant look that she quickly masked with concern. "Jessica, please sit down," Dad said, gesturing to the armchair across from them. "We need to talk." I set down my grocery bags and sat, my heart beginning to race. "What's going on?" Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have made some decisions about the house that you need to be aware of." "Okay," I said cautiously. "As you know, this house has been our family home for over 30 years. We've put a lot of thought into its future, especially given your mother's health scare and our eventual retirement plans." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "We've decided to transfer ownership of the house to Madison." The words didn't register at first. "Transfer? What do you mean?" "The deed has been changed," Dad said flatly. "The house now legally belongs to Madison." I looked from Dad to Mom, who wouldn't meet my eyes, then to Madison, who was examining her manicure with feigned nonchalance. "When did this happen?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "We finalized everything last week," Dad replied. "Last week? And you're just telling me now?" The shock was giving way to anger. "Why would you do this without even discussing it with me?" "Madison needs stability," Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. "After everything she's been through in New York, she needs a secure base to rebuild her life." "And what about me?" I demanded. "What about everything we discussed about me taking over the house? What about the money I've invested in renovations?" You're more established, Dad said, repeating his line from our previous conversation. You have a career savings. Madison is at a more vulnerable point in her life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I put my entire life on hold for this family. I gave up a promising career, a relationship, my independence, all to be here when you needed me. And this is how you repay me. We're grateful for everything you did during my illness, Mom said weakly. But that doesn't entitle you to our house. Entitle? I repeated, the word stinging. I never felt entitled to anything. I thought we had an understanding, an agreement. Nothing was ever in writing, Dad said coldly. And frankly, Jessica, your reaction now is exactly why we handled it this way. You've become possessive of a house that was never yours. I looked at Madison, who had finally raised her eyes to watch the confrontation. And you're okay with this? Taking the house knowing what was promised to me? Madison shrugged. Mom and Dad made their decision. It's not my fault they think I need it more. The casual cruelty of her response left me speechless. There's more, Dad continued after an uncomfortable silence. Now that Madison owns the property, she has the right to decide who lives here. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? Madison needs the space to establish her design business, Dad explained. She'll be renovating, and having contractors in and out would be disruptive for you. You're evicting me. I couldn't believe the words coming out of my mouth. We're asking you to find your own place, Dad corrected, as if the semantic difference mattered. You have a good job, you can afford an apartment. How much time do I have? I asked, my voice hollow. Dad and Mom exchanged glances. We think 48 hours is reasonable, Dad finally said. The weekend is coming up, so you'll have time to move and settle before work on Monday. 48 hours, I repeated, feeling numb. 3 years of my life, and you're giving me 2 days to get out. We're sorry it has to be this way, Mom said, tears spilling down her cheeks. We never wanted to hurt you. Then why are you doing this? I demanded. It's what's best for the family, Dad insisted. Madison has a vision for the house, for her business. This is a chance for her to really establish herself. And what about my vision? What about what's best for me? You're strong, Jessica, Mom said. You've always been the independent one. You'll land on your feet. I looked around at the three of them, Dad resolute, Mom tearful but compliant, Madison barely concealing her satisfaction, and realized with perfect clarity that I had become an outsider in my own family. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. I walked out of the living room, ignoring their calls to come back and discuss further details. In my bedroom. No, not my bedroom anymore, Madison's bedroom now. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had just happened. My family had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. They had taken my sacrifice, my love, my investment, both emotional and financial, and discarded it all for Madison's benefit. I heard a soft knock at the door, and Mom entered without waiting for a response. Jessica, please try to understand, she began. Understand what? I asked. That after everything I've done, I'm disposable. You're not disposable, Mom protested. We love you. But Madison needs us right now. I needed you 3 years ago, I reminded her. And I put aside everything to be here for you. Doesn't that count for anything? Mom's eyes filled with tears again. Of course it does. But your father has made up his mind, and you know how he gets. In that moment, I saw my mother clearly too, a woman who had always taken the path of least resistance, who would rather betray one daughter than stand up to her husband. You should have fought for me, I said quietly. Jessica. Please leave, I interrupted. I have packing to do. 48 hours isn't much time to dismantle a life. After she left, I sat alone in the growing darkness, the ultimatum echoing in my mind. 48 hours to get out. Your sister owns the house now. 3 years of sacrifice erased with a single decision I hadn't been consulted on. The betrayal was complete. The family I had put everything on hold for had discarded me the moment I was no longer useful. And now I had 2 days to figure out what came next. After my mother left the room, I sat frozen for what felt like hours. The reality of my situation was too enormous to process all at once. Evicted. Betrayed. Replaced. Each word echoed in my mind like a physical blow. When the initial shock began to wear off, the first emotion to break through was denial. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some misunderstanding, some way to make my parents see reason. Perhaps if I spoke to them individually, away from Madison's influence. But deep down, I knew it was real. The cold, businesslike expression on my father's face had told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a hasty decision or a misunderstanding. This was calculated. Around midnight, denial gave way to rage. White-hot, consuming anger that made my hands shake and my chest tighten. How dare they do this to me? After everything I had sacrificed, everything I had given up, how could they betray me so completely? I paced the small bedroom, my childhood bedroom that would soon no longer be mine, mentally cataloging every sacrifice I had made for this family. The promotion I turned down in Chicago. The boyfriend I broke up with. The friends I'd lost touch with. The countless nights spent researching cancer treatments and side effect remedies when I should have been sleeping. The thousands of dollars I'd invested in renovations. All of it thrown back in my face as if it meant nothing. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would understand, my best friend Lauren. Despite the late hour, she answered on the third ring. "Jess? What's wrong?" Her voice was groggy with sleep, but immediately concerned. The sound of her voice broke something in me, and I found myself sobbing so hard I could barely speak. Through broken sentences and gasping breaths, I explained what had happened. "Those absolute bastards," Lauren said when I finished, fully awake now and furious on my behalf. "After everything you did for them." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I have nowhere to go." "Yes, you do," Lauren said firmly. "You're coming to stay with me. I have that spare bedroom, and you can stay as long as you need to. I can't impose on you like that." "Jessica Miller, you listen to me," Lauren interrupted. "You've spent 3 years putting everyone else first. It's time someone put you first, even if that someone has to be you. Pack your things, take whatever matters to you, and come to my place. We'll figure out the rest together." After we hung up, I felt marginally calmer. At least I had somewhere to go, a temporary landing place while I sorted out my next steps. But the anger remained, joined now by a desperate need to understand how legally my parents could simply transfer the house to Madison without my knowledge. I spent the next hour researching property law on my laptop, trying to understand what rights, if any, I might have. I hadn't been on the deed, but I had made substantial improvements to the property. There was also the matter of the verbal agreement, though I quickly discovered that verbal agreements regarding real estate were difficult to enforce without supporting evidence. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion overtook me, and I fell into a restless sleep, still fully dressed on top of my covers. I woke at dawn, my mind immediately snapping back to my predicament. The anger had subsided somewhat, replaced by a desperate bargaining. Maybe if I promised to move out eventually, they would give me more time. Maybe if I offered to pay rent, they would let me stay until I found a suitable place. Maybe if I apologized for getting upset, they would reconsider the entire arrangement. But apologize for what? Being betrayed? Having my life appended without warning? The thought brought the anger surging back. I forced myself to shower and dress, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Then I began the heartbreaking task of deciding what to take with me and what to leave behind. Lauren's spare room was small. I couldn't possibly take everything. As I sorted through my belongings, prioritizing necessities and items of sentimental value, the emotional impact of each decision wore me down. This lamp I bought on my first paycheck. These books that had comforted me through difficult times. The quilt my grandmother had made for me before she passed. Each item carried memories, connections to a life that was being stripped away from me. By midday, I had filled several boxes with clothes and essentials. I still had no clear plan beyond going to Lauren's, but the physical act of packing had given me a sense of purpose, however temporary. My phone rang, Lauren checking in on me. "How's it going?" she asked. "I'm packing," I said. "But there's so much to sort through, and I don't know what to do with the furniture I bought." "I've been thinking about that," Lauren said. "My brother has a storage unit he's not fully using. He said you can store your larger items there until you figure things out." The kindness of her offer, contrasted with my family's cruelty, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. After we hung up, I continued packing, moving to the attic where I had stored some childhood mementos. As I sorted through old yearbooks and school projects, I came across a box labeled Family Documents in my mother's handwriting. Curiosity made me open it. Inside were birth certificates, old insurance policies, and a folder containing property documents related to our house. I shouldn't have been looking through these private papers, but given the circumstances, I felt justified. Among the documents, I found the original deed to the house, purchased 25 years ago. What caught my eye was the source of the down payment: inheritance from Margaret Miller, maternal grandmother, designated for both daughters. I stared at the document, my mind racing. My grandmother had left money specifically for both Madison and me, and that money had been used to purchase the family home. If that was true, then I had a claim to the property that went beyond verbal promises or my own financial investments. Digging deeper into the box, I found my grandmother's will. Sure enough, it specified that her estate was to be divided equally between her two granddaughters, with my parents as trustees until we reached adulthood. The discovery was like a splash of cold water, clearing my mind and washing away the fog of emotional turmoil. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about something potentially illegal. My parents had used inheritance money meant for both Madison and me to purchase the house, and now they were giving the entire property to Madison. For the first time since receiving the ultimatum, I felt a spark of something other than despair: determination. I carefully photographed the relevant documents with my phone, then returned everything to the box and placed it back where I'd found it. Back in my room, I sat on the bed and tried to think clearly. The documents changed things, but I wasn't sure how to proceed. I needed professional advice. I called a law firm and managed to get a consultation scheduled for the following morning. Then I resumed packing, but with a different energy now. I was no longer just a victim being forced out of her home. I was someone with agency, with options, with a potential case. By evening, I had nearly finished packing the essentials. My parents and Madison had made themselves scarce throughout the day, avoiding direct contact. That was fine with me. I wasn't ready to face them yet, not until I had a clearer understanding of my position. As the sun set on my first day of the 48-hour countdown, I sat at the small desk in my childhood bedroom and began to formulate a plan. Not a desperate, emotional reaction, but a strategic response to what had been done to me. First, I would document everything: every improvement I had made to the house, every dollar I had spent, every conversation about my eventually taking ownership. I would gather evidence of my grandmother's inheritance and how it had been used. I would consult with an attorney to understand my legal options. But more than that, I would reclaim my power in this situation. For too long, I had allowed my family to take advantage of my good nature, my sense of duty, my willingness to sacrifice. That ended now. I opened my laptop and began typing, creating a detailed inventory of my contributions to the house, both financial and labor. I searched through old emails and bank statements for proof of purchases. I wrote down every conversation I could remember about the house being my inheritance. As I worked, a sense of clarity and purpose replaced the emotional chaos of the previous 24 hours. I might not be able to stop my parents from giving the house to Madison, but I would not walk away empty-handed. I would not be erased. By midnight, exhaustion overtook me again, but it was different this time, the exhaustion of purpose rather than despair. I had a plan now, incomplete though it might be. I had evidence. Most importantly, I had rediscovered my sense of self-worth, separate from my family's assessment of me. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself. I would emerge from this betrayal stronger, wiser, and unwilling to ever again sacrifice my well-being for people who didn't value it. The Jessica who had put her life on hold for an ungrateful family was gone. In her place was someone who would fight for what was rightfully hers. I woke the next morning with newfound clarity and purpose. This was my final day in the house according to my parents' ultimatum, and I intended to make it count. I had an appointment with an attorney at 10 a.m., so I dressed professionally and gathered the documents I had discovered, along with my detailed inventory of home improvements. Before leaving, I encountered Madison in the hallway. She seemed surprised to see me looking composed rather than devastated. "You're up early," she remarked, eyeing my outfit. I have appointments today, I replied neutrally. Don't worry, I'll be out by the deadline. Something in my tone must have alerted her that I wasn't as defeated as she'd expected. She frowned slightly. Look, Jess, I know this is hard, but it really is for the best. I need this fresh start. I simply nodded, unwilling to engage further. Any conversation would either deteriorate into an argument or require me to pretend a forgiveness I didn't feel. Neither would serve my purposes. I hope we can still be sisters after this, Madison added, her expression a perfect mask of concern. We'll always be sisters, I responded. But what that means going forward will depend on how things unfold. I left her looking uncertain, which felt like a small victory. The law office of Abigail Crawford was located in a renovated Victorian house downtown. Miss Crawford herself was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened attentively as I explained my situation. So to summarize, she said when I finished, your parents used inheritance money intended for both you and your sister to purchase the family home. You invested significant time and money improving the property based on verbal assurances that you would eventually inherit it. Now they've transferred ownership solely to your sister and are evicting you with minimal notice. Is that correct? Yes, I confirmed. I have documentation of my grandmother's will specifying the inheritance was for both of us, and I have records of the improvements I've made to the property. Miss Crawford nodded thoughtfully. You potentially have several claims here. First, regarding your grandmother's inheritance, if those funds were explicitly meant for both you and your sister, but were used to purchase an asset now being given only to your sister, there's a case for conversion or breach of fiduciary duty. She paused, scanning the documents I'd provided. Second, while verbal agreements regarding real estate are typically unenforceable under the statute of frauds, there are exceptions when there's been partial performance. Your improvements to the property, made in reliance on their promises, could constitute partial performance. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means you have leverage, Ms. Crawford replied. We could potentially challenge the property transfer or, more likely, negotiate a settlement that compensates you for your share of the inheritance and your investments in the property. How long would that take? I asked. Legal proceedings can be drawn out, especially when family is involved. But a strongly worded letter from my office outlining your claims might bring them to the negotiating table more quickly. I considered this. I don't want to drag this out if possible. My parents are still my parents, despite everything. Ms. Crawford nodded understandingly. Let's start with a letter and see how they respond. In the meantime, document everything, especially any further conversations about the house or your eviction. After setting up a follow-up appointment, I left the law office feeling more confident. I had legal options, which was more than I'd had yesterday. My next stop was the bank. I withdrew a significant portion of my savings and opened a new account at a different bank. I didn't think my parents would try to interfere with my finances, but recent events had shattered my trust in them. Better safe than sorry. Afterward, I visited the hardware store where I'd purchased materials for most of my home improvements. The manager knew me by name, and I was able to get copies of receipts for major purchases over the past 3 years. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the house, continuing to pack. I carefully selected items that were unquestionably mine, possessions I'd brought from Chicago or purchased since moving back. For anything that might be considered a family item, I took photos, but left it behind. I wasn't going to give my parents any reason to accuse me of taking things that weren't mine. As I worked, I heard Madison on the phone in her room, excitedly discussing her plans for redesigning the entire place now that it was hers. The casual entitlement in her voice strengthened my resolve. Around 4 o'clock, my father returned from work. He seemed surprised to find me calmly packing rather than either gone already or having a breakdown. Jessica, he began awkwardly. I just wanted to check if you need any help with your things. No, thank you, I replied politely but firmly. I've arranged everything. He hovered in the doorway. Where will you be staying? With Lauren initially, until I find a place of my own. He nodded, seeming relieved that I wasn't homeless. That's good. I want you to know that this wasn't an easy decision for us. I looked at him directly. It seems to have been easier for you than it is for me. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Your mother, and I just want what's best for both our daughters. What's best would have been honesty from the beginning, I replied. Not making promises you had no intention of keeping. We never promised. Yes, you did, I interrupted calmly. But that's a conversation for another time. Right now, I'm focused on respecting your deadline. He seemed taken aback by my composure. Perhaps he had expected tears or pleading, which would have allowed him to feel both powerful and magnanimous. My calm determination gave him neither. Well, if you need anything, he trailed off. I'll let you know, I finished for him, then turned back to my packing, effectively dismissing him. After he left, I took a break and called Lauren to confirm my arrival time for the following day. Then I sent a text to my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, asking if we could meet for coffee soon. Aunt Patricia had always been more clear-eyed about family dynamics than my mother, and I wanted her perspective. As evening approached, I heard my mother in the kitchen preparing dinner. For a moment, I considered joining them for one last family meal, but decided against it. Breaking bread with people who had betrayed me so fundamentally felt impossible right now. Instead, I ordered takeout and ate in my room while continuing to organize my belongings. By 9 o'clock, I had sorted everything into 3 categories: items to take to Lauren's, items to put in storage, and items to leave behind. As I worked, I came across a small jewelry box I'd forgotten about, tucked at the back of my closet. Inside was a letter from my grandmother, written to me on my 21st birthday. Rereading it now, certain lines jumped out at me. Remember, Jessica, that your inheritance is not just material possessions, but the values that have defined our family for generations: honesty, integrity, and fairness. I've arranged for both you and your sister to be provided for equally, because that's what fairness means. It was another piece of evidence confirming what I discovered in the attic. My grandmother had intended her legacy to benefit both her granddaughters equally. My parents had ignored her wishes, just as they had disregarded mine. I carefully placed the letter in my purse, then continued packing. By midnight, everything was ready for tomorrow's move. Lauren's brother would arrive with his truck in the morning to help with the furniture going into storage, and Lauren herself would come to help transport the rest to her apartment. Before going to bed, I took one last walk through the house, saying a private goodbye to the space I had loved and cared for. Whatever happened legally, I knew I would never live here again. That chapter of my life was closing. Back in my room, I sat down at the desk and wrote a letter to my parents. Not an angry screed or a tearful plea, but a clear, factual account of what had happened from my perspective and what I expected going forward. I explained that I would be seeking legal advice regarding my grandmother's inheritance and my investments in the property. I stated that while I would always be their daughter, our relationship would need to be rebuilt on a new foundation of honesty and respect. I sealed the letter in an envelope to be left on the kitchen counter after I departed tomorrow. Then I prepared for my last night in the house that had been my home for the past 3 years, and which I had foolishly believed would be my home for many more. As I drifted off to sleep, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. I had gone from devastated victim to determined advocate for my own interests. The pain of betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath everything, but it no longer controlled me. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. 3 weeks later, I was settling into a new routine in my temporary home at Lauren's apartment. Her spare bedroom was small but comfortable, and her unwavering support had been my lifeline during this difficult transition. I had found a storage unit for my furniture and larger belongings, started apartment hunting, and was gradually rebuilding my sense of self outside of my family's orbit. The morning after I'd moved out, my parents had called several times, but I had let the calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to speak with them yet, not until I had more emotional distance and legal clarity. Madison had texted once, a message that read, "I hope you're okay. The house feels weird without you." I hadn't responded to that either. My lawyer, Ms. Crawford, had sent a formal letter to my parents outlining my legal claims regarding my grandmother's inheritance and my investments in the house. We had requested financial compensation rather than challenging the property transfer itself. I had no desire to live in that house anymore, not after everything that had happened. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I received an unexpected call from my grandfather William, my father's father. We had always been close, but I hadn't spoken to him since the eviction. I hesitated before answering, unsure if he was calling as an emissary for my parents. "Jessica," he said when I picked up, his voice gruff with emotion. "It's about time you answered a family call." "I'm sorry, Grandpa," I replied. "It's been a difficult few weeks." "I know it has," he said. "That's why I'm calling. I just got back from visiting your parents, and I need to hear your side of this mess." I took a deep breath and told him everything: the sacrifices I'd made moving home, the promises about the house, the investments I'd made, the shocking eviction, and the discovery about my grandmother's inheritance. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds of disbelief or disapproval. "Your grandmother Margaret would be turning in her grave," he said when I finished. "She was very clear about that inheritance being split equally between you girls." "You knew about that?" I asked. "Of course I did. Margaret and I were good friends even after your grandma Beth passed. She talked to me about her plans for you girls. And now to hear that Robert and Eleanor used that money for the house and then just handed it to Madison." He trailed off, clearly angry. "I've hired a lawyer," I told him. "We've sent a letter asking for financial compensation." "Good for you," Grandpa William said firmly. "But this isn't just about money, Jessica. This is about right and wrong. I'm calling a family meeting this Sunday, and I expect everyone to be there. You, your parents, Madison, and me." "Grandpa, I don't know if I'm ready." "I understand you're hurt," he interrupted gently. "But avoiding them won't resolve anything. Come to the meeting. I'll make sure you're heard." After we hung up, I sat in Lauren's living room, considering my grandfather's request. The thought of facing my family made my stomach churn, but he was right. This situation wouldn't resolve itself, and my lawyer's letter alone might not be enough to make them understand the depth of their betrayal. I called Ms. Crawford to update her on the family meeting and get her advice. She thought it could be productive, but cautioned me to stick to facts rather than emotions and to avoid making any agreements without consulting her first. The days leading up to Sunday were tense. I prepared what I wanted to say, focusing on concrete events and actions rather than my feelings of betrayal. Lauren helped me rehearse, playing devil's advocate to ensure I was ready for any counterarguments my family might make. Sunday arrived too quickly. I drove to my grandfather's house, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. When I arrived, I saw my parents' car already in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door. Grandpa William answered immediately, enveloping me in a tight hug. "I'm proud of you for coming," he whispered before leading me into the living room. My parents and Madison were seated on the couch, looking uncomfortable. Mom seemed to have been crying, while Dad maintained his usual stoic expression. Madison looked up when I entered, then quickly averted her eyes. "Now that everyone's here," Grandpa William began, taking a seat in his armchair, "we're going to have an honest conversation about what's happened." "And I mean honest, Robert," he added, fixing my father with a stern look. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I'm not sure this is necessary. This is between us and Jessica. It became family business when you used Margaret's inheritance money to buy that house," Grandpa interrupted. "Money that was meant for both girls, not just Madison." Mom looked startled. "How did you know about that?" All eyes turned to me. "I found Grandma Margaret's will," I admitted. "Along with the documents showing her inheritance was used for the down payment on the house." "You went through our private papers?" Dad asked, his tone accusatory. "I was packing in the attic and found them," I replied calmly. "And given that you were evicting me from a house purchased partly with my inheritance, I think I had a right to know." Grandpa William nodded approvingly. "Robert, you and Eleanor have some explaining to do. How could you use money meant for both girls to buy a house, then give that house only to Madison?" Dad looked trapped. "The situation changed. Jessica has her own career, her own life. Madison needs the security of a home base for her business. So Jessica's sacrifice of her career and life to help when Eleanor was sick means nothing." Grandpa challenged. "Of course it means something," Mom interjected tearfully. "We're grateful for everything Jessica did. Grateful enough to give her 48 hours to get out of the house she helped maintain for 3 years." I asked quietly. The room fell silent. "I never asked for the house," Madison suddenly said, though her eyes remained fixed on the floor. Dad suggested it would be a good base for my design business. But you accepted it, I pointed out. Knowing that I had been promised a future there. Knowing how much I had invested in it. I didn't know about the inheritance, Madison admitted. Not until Grandpa called yesterday. I looked at my parents, who had the grace to look ashamed. Here's what's going to happen, Grandpa William announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. Robert and Eleanor, you're going to make this right. Jessica is entitled to half the value of that house, plus compensation for the improvements she made. And you both owe her an apology for breaking your promises and treating her the way you did. Mom was openly crying now. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but held his tongue under Grandpa's stern gaze. We never meant to hurt you, Jessica, Mom finally said. We thought you would be fine, that you could easily start over somewhere else. That's the problem, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. You didn't think about how your decisions would affect me. You only thought about what Madison wanted. I've always favored Madison, Mom admitted in a small voice. Not because I love her more, but because she's always seemed more fragile, more in need of protection. You were always so capable, so strong. Being strong doesn't mean I don't get hurt, I said. It doesn't mean I don't need support too. Dad cleared his throat. I received the letter from your attorney, he said stiffly. We're prepared to compensate you for your share of the inheritance and your investments in the property. That's a start, Grandpa William said. But money alone doesn't fix the breach of trust. This family needs healing, and that begins with acknowledgement and genuine apology. Dad looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in weeks. I'm sorry, Jessica. What we did was wrong. We broke our promises to you, and we failed to recognize everything you sacrificed for this family. His words seemed sincere, though part of me wondered if he was just saying what Grandpa William expected him to say. Still, it was more acknowledgement than I had expected. Madison finally raised her eyes to meet mine. I'm sorry too, Jess. I was so focused on what I wanted that I didn't think about what it would cost you. If you want the house back. I don't, I interrupted. I couldn't live there now, knowing how easily I was discarded. But I do want what's rightfully mine, and I want this family to understand that they can't treat people this way. Not even family, not even me. The conversation continued for hours, with old resentments and patterns being aired and examined. Grandpa William moderated, never allowing anyone to deflect or minimize. By the end, we had reached a tentative agreement. My parents would compensate me for my share of the inheritance plus my investments in the house. Madison would acknowledge my contributions in writing. And we would all commit to family counseling to rebuild trust. It wasn't a perfect resolution. The hurt was too deep for that, but it was a beginning. As we prepared to leave, Grandpa William pulled me aside. You stood your ground with dignity, he said. Your grandmother Margaret would be proud of you. His words meant more to me than any financial settlement could. As I drove back to Lauren's apartment, I felt lighter somehow. The betrayal still stung, but now there was also a path forward, a way to reclaim not just what was financially mine, but also my place in the family, on new terms, with clearer boundaries and expectations. The reckoning had been painful but necessary. And in its aftermath, I could finally begin to imagine a future beyond the shadow of what had been done to me. 6 months after that confrontational family meeting at my grandfather's house, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those devastating 48 hours when I received my parents' ultimatum. The legal settlement was finalized within weeks of our family meeting. My parents compensated me for my share of my grandmother's inheritance, plus the documented value of all the improvements I had made to the house. It was a substantial sum, enough to put a significant down payment on a place of my own and still have savings left over. Madison had kept the house, but sent me a handwritten letter acknowledging my contributions and apologizing for her role in pushing me out. The letter seemed genuine, though our relationship remained strained. We were civil when family obligations brought us together, but the easy sisterhood of our childhood was gone, perhaps irretrievably. My parents tried harder to make amends. Dad had difficulty expressing emotions, but he showed his regret through actions, helping me find my new place, offering practical assistance with the move, respecting my need for distance. Mom was more demonstrative, calling regularly and making efforts to rebuild our relationship, though I maintained firm boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss with her. The family counseling Grandpa William had insisted upon had been revealing. Through those sessions, I came to understand the deeply ingrained patterns that had led to my situation: my father's authoritarian decision-making, my mother's conflict avoidance, Madison's learned helplessness, and my own tendency to sacrifice my needs for others' approval. Understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me contextualize it and avoid repeating those patterns in my own life. Today marked a significant milestone: the housewarming for my new condominium. It was a bright, airy two-bedroom in a neighborhood I loved, close enough to visit family when I wanted to but far enough to maintain my independence. I had decorated it entirely to my taste, creating a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been in my parents' home. Lauren was the first to arrive, bearing a potted plant and a bottle of champagne. To new beginnings, she toasted after I gave her the tour. "I couldn't have done this without you," I told her sincerely. Not just the apartment, offering me a place to stay when I needed it, but helping me find the strength to stand up for myself. "You always had the strength," Lauren replied. "You just needed permission to use it." Other friends arrived, along with my Aunt Patricia and Uncle James, who had been supportive throughout the ordeal. Grandpa William came, looking pleased with my new place and prouder still of how I had handled myself through everything. My parents and Madison arrived last, bearing housewarming gifts and tentative smiles. I welcomed them politely, accepting their gifts and showing them around. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward but not hostile, progress of a sort. As the evening progressed, I found myself on my small balcony, taking a moment alone amid the socializing. Looking out at the city lights, I reflected on everything that had happened and all I had learned. The betrayal by my family had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. It had shown me who truly had my back and who would sacrifice me for convenience. It had revealed the dangers of putting my life on hold for others without clear agreements and boundaries. Most importantly, it had taught me that I was stronger than I knew. For 3 years, I had defined myself primarily through my family role: the responsible daughter, the selfless caretaker, the one who could be counted on to put others first. When that role was abruptly terminated, I had initially felt lost, as if my identity had been stripped away along with my place in the family home. But in the months that followed, I had rediscovered myself, not as an extension of my family's needs, but as an individual with my own dreams, boundaries, and worth. I had reclaimed my career, receiving a promotion at work that recognized my skills and dedication. I had expanded my social circle, making new friends while nurturing the relationships that had sustained me through the crisis. I had even started dating again, this time with a clearer sense of what I wanted and deserved in a relationship. The settlement money had given me financial independence, but the true freedom had come from within, from learning to value myself enough to insist that others value me too. My mother joined me on the balcony, interrupting my reflections. "It's a lovely place, Jessica," she said, hesitantly. "You've done a beautiful job with it." "Thank you," I replied. "It feels like mine in a way the other house never did, even when I thought it would be." Mom looked pained but nodded. "I understand why you may never fully forgive us," she said quietly. "Especially me. I should have stood up for you." I considered her words. "Forgiveness is a process," I finally said. "I'm working on it, for my sake more than yours. But trust is different. That has to be rebuilt through actions, not just apologies." "I know," she acknowledged. "And I'm committed to doing that work, however long it takes." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party drifting out from the living room. "You know," Mom said eventually, "you remind me so much of your grandmother, Margaret. She had that same quiet strength, that same refusal to be diminished." Coming from her, it was perhaps the highest compliment she could offer. "Thank you," I said simply. Later, after everyone had gone and I was alone in my new home, I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, savoring the peace. The path to this moment had been unexpected and painful, but I wouldn't change it. Through loss, I had found myself. Through betrayal, I had discovered my worth. The house my parents had promised and then given to Madison had never truly been mine. But this place, This life I was building belonged to me completely. It was founded not on someone else's promises or approval, but on my own strength, choices, and boundaries. As I prepared for bed in my new bedroom, I thought about the question Lauren had asked me earlier. Do you ever wish you could go back to before, when you didn't know what your family was capable of? My answer had been immediate and certain: no. Living in an illusion of security and love isn't living authentically. I'd rather know the truth and build my life on that, even if the truth was painful. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all. That truth, however difficult, provides a stronger foundation than the most comforting lies. That boundaries, once established, create not isolation but healthier connections. That sometimes, being pushed out of what you thought was your home leads you to where you truly belong. I slept soundly that night, in a home that was undeniably mine, surrounded by the life I had chosen rather than the one that had been chosen for me. The journey had been unexpected and painful, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself than I had ever been before. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family who took you for granted? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through life's challenges. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more reliable than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it gives strength to anyone facing similar battles. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.